So last week I made a guitar body and I made a video about it. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely go watch it. It is a lot of fun. I made the whole thing from scratch, and then my buddy Alex came in and helped me wire it up and finish it. Anyway, he couldn't afford to pay me for the guitar body, so instead he traded me this guitar that he had sitting in his closet and he wasn't really playing anymore. And I know, I think I got the long end of the stick on this deal. He's a really good friend and very generous, so it worked out for everybody. But now I have a problem. My guitar hanger only has 3 slots on it, and there isn't really space to add one, and I play all 3 of these instruments, so I need a guitar stand for this. Okay, now obviously I own a couple of guitar stands, but seriously, look at this thing. It's hideous. And I make things for a living, so there's no reason to put up with something ugly like this. I've decided that to make something that's functional and looks good, I'm going to make my stand out of wood using a bent lamination technique. Now, I've never done this before, so I'm no expert, but I have read a bunch of stuff on the internet. And these days, that's the same thing as being an expert. I start off by ripping strips off this piece of pine. Now I'm using a softwood here, which isn't as strong as oak or maple, but it should bend easily and be flexible without snapping. I'm ripping the strips to about 3/8 of an inch, which seems to be the right compromise between strength and flexibility. For bent laminations, a lot of craftspeople build a form and then press the lamination between 2 halves of the form. Now, since I'm just making one piece here, that seems like kind of a waste of time. So instead, I'm going to have a central point that's going to be at the middle of the bend, and then I'm going to pull it in on either side. I could use clamps for that, but instead I'm going to use these pieces of railroad track. They're heavy enough to hold the lamination in place, but it's very easy to move them back and forth, and I don't have to unscrew and reclamp clamps every time I'm trying to make an adjustment. Obviously, this glue up is really tricky, and I only get the one shot to get it right, so I'm being really careful. For everything I've read about bent lamination glue ups, you're supposed to use some sort of special glue like slow cure epoxy or urea glue, but I don't have any of that stuff, so I'm going to use Titebond 1. And that's got a handy property, which you can pour a little bit of water into it, and it'll extend the open time and make it a little bit thinner, make it soak in a little bit better. You might notice that I've got a couple pieces of dark wood mixed in with my pine here. I was having trouble with some of my pine pieces splitting, so I quickly ripped a couple pieces of white oak. That should only make the finished product stronger, and they bend okay. I've also got an idea to do something a little bit tricky with the ends, so I'm not spreading glue on the very ends of my laminations, and I'm sliding in some pieces of parchment paper to make sure that stuff doesn't glue together. My overall idea for assembling this glue up worked out really well. My central fulcrum bends everything nicely and stays in place, and my pieces of railroad track are really easy to adjust, except they turned out to be not quite heavy enough to resist the spring back, so I added some extra chunks of steel real quick to get them where they needed to be. The biggest problem was just having little gaps in between the laminations in all sorts of places that I wasn't necessarily expecting them, and sometimes they just popped up out of nowhere. So even though I got a ton of clamps out before I started here, I ended up using almost every small clamp I own in the shop. I found out that these spring clamps are useful for sort of getting the glue up started, but they're not good at getting those laminations together and getting some glue to squeeze out. So it was really important to get screw clamps and exert a lot more pressure on the laminations. Once the whole thing was done, the biggest challenge was just to stop futzing with it. I need to leave it alone for about 24 hours so I get maximum strength. Okay, so now my lamination has sat for 24 hours. The big concern here is spring back. And if it springs back too much, then the project's just not going to work and I'm going to have to start over again. I'm also a tiny bit nervous that I might have glued it to the table, even though I put the wax down. It really looks glued to the table. There's one. Here's the other. It is not glued to the table. There's a win, and it looks like the amount of spring back is very minimal. Okay. This is interesting. Wow. It doesn't just have a good curvature. It is strong. It's really, wow, this is good. I gotta tell you, for a first try, this is a lot better than I was expecting. It's nice to get a win once in a while. Now I put these pieces of parchment in between the laminations on both ends because I didn't want them to glue together in this length. And what I want to do there is separate these ends and fill in with some pieces of dark wood so I get this fanned out effect on either end. The only problem with doing that is that I'm going to create stress back here that could over time split these laminations. So I'm going to pick a point right here. I'm going to insert dowels with epoxy and trim them off, and then I'm going to reinforce that with thick copper wire that I'm also going to epoxy down. Then I'll spread these edges, cut and fit thin pieces of walnut, and then trim and sand everything flush to get the detail that I'm looking for. So the idea here is that this central piece is going to be the main support of the stand. The guitar is going to hang down like this. And then what I need to stabilize it is I want to have like a tripod, so I need a second bent piece of wood that's going to connect right about here and then give me 2 points on the floor on either side. And that's going to require a much tighter radius than I was able to bend this, but it still needs to be strong. So I'm going to switch to a much thinner laminate, and I'm going to glue up many more pieces into a tighter radius that I can then attach down here and make a stable stand to hold the instrument. So I wanted to make the joint between the two pieces really strong, but I also realized this whole thing has to come apart, so if we ever need to move, I can take it down and pack it in a box. It's too big and too fragile the way it is. Here's what I came up with. I used a carriage bolt and a wing nut and a washer for the main mechanical connection. And then to keep it from moving, I put these 2 brass pins in here. You can see them right here, and they fit into these diagonal holes here. They just keep this piece from rotating back and forth, and then the carriage bolt gives me all the holding power I need. And then on the front side, when the whole thing is together, all you see is the nice smooth head of this carriage bolt. So it's a good joint, and it's pretty low profile. Now that the basic structure of the stand is pretty much done, I need a way to actually hang the head of the guitar from it. Fender guitars have asymmetrical headstock, where the 2 parts where they would get grabbed by the stand, one is higher than the other. So I can't just make a fork or something simple, it's got to be more complicated than that. So I grab a piece of brass rod, drill it out, and tap it for a 1/4-20 bolt. Then I cut some pieces of aluminum, drill those for clearance holes, and assemble the whole thing. Now I've got a little hanger assembly that can be adjusted so it can be higher on either side or parallel. So as I want to use this stand for different instruments, it can accommodate pretty much any headstock shape I would want. Now I'm not really excited about having to use a wrench every time I adjust this, so I'm going to make a couple of wooden handles and epoxy the heads of my bolts into them so that I'll be able to just change it on the fly anytime I want to. Now I can bore out the top of the stand and install the brass rod with a little bit of epoxy. Now once there's a guitar actually hanging on it, that rod's going to be under a ton of torque. So I'm also going to drill all the way through the top of the stand and the rod and install another pin that's going to help keep it stable and keep it from turning. Now the guitar hangs on the stand really nicely, but I don't like the way it hits the bottom. So I'm going to do one more piece of lamination, and I have an idea for this sort of spiral curve thing, a really tight piece of laminate that'll hold the bottom of the guitar up and add one more little flourish to the whole thing. This time, the stuff I'm using is like paper. I can just cut it with a razor blade, and it's really flexible, but I have to use a lot of pieces to get the strength that I need. I get a bunch of different scraps together and alternate the colors so I'll have a nice visual effect when it's done. This time I need to use a form, but instead of building something, I'm just going to use this hunk of copper pipe. It's got the radius that I need, and it's nice and strong, so it'll support everything. I mix up my glue and water just like before, and then really slowly work my way around the piece of pipe, making sure the glue has a chance to soak in and soften up the wood a little bit. There's a lot of danger of breaking the laminate here, so I'm being really careful and adding every single clamp I can possibly fit. When it's done, I do a little bit of cleanup work, And I've got exactly the graceful little curve that I was looking for. It's going to hold the bottom of the guitar and just add an extra detail to the whole piece. I'm getting excited about the way this is coming out now. Now the hanger I made for the guitar headstock works just fine, but it's too narrow and it's hard to get the headstock in there without kind of bumping it around a lot, and also the edges of the aluminum are too sharp. They're going to mess up the finish over time. So I'm going to take those aluminum pieces and bend them and shape them with a vise and an anvil and a rawhide hammer so that they're going to let the guitar hang more easily. And then to take care of any problems marring the finish, I'll cover those with some scrap vinyl, and that's going to protect the finish of the guitar, and it's also going to make the stand look a little nicer. Now I'm just about done, but a problem kind of cropped up. The whole stand is just a little bit twisted off in one direction. And that could be because I didn't use forms when I did the main laminations, but you can see it twists off to the right a bit, and then the little spiral I did to hold the bottom of the guitar, that twists off just a little bit to the left. So between the two of them, I've got a pretty serious alignment problem. And everything's glued together and I can't change the laminations in the direction they go, so I need a different solution. Luckily, I need at least one more point for the guitar to touch. It can't just hang on 2 points, it'll wobble around too much and fall. So I want to put a cross piece across the front of that little spiral, and that's a great chance for me to even things out. So I take a strip of maple and I just cut a slanted mortise into it. And I test fit it a couple of times and get it on, and what I'm able to do is correct for the twist in the stand and get the instrument to still hang straight. Now, when we look at it from the top like this, you can still see some of that twist. It's still in there, but no one's ever going to look at it this way because it's going to be against a wall or in a corner all the time. And when you look at it from the front, it looks just fine. Once I have these alignment issues sorted out, it's just a little bit of cleanup work, a couple of coats of clear lacquer, and then... What I like about this project is, well, there's a couple things. First, when you look at it head-on, the guitar sort of looks like it's floating in midair. I didn't 100% expect that effect, but I like it a lot. And then the thing I did expect, and I was shooting for, was the gentle, flowing curves of the stand, and the way they sort of complement the organic shape of this particular guitar. I also like the bent lamination technique. It's a great way to incorporate curves into your work and make pieces that are also very strong and springy. And because I had all of this wood and glue on hand, I was able to make this project for no money, which is great. I try to make all of my projects very budget friendly. And I think about budget a lot when I do my videos. And I've been thinking about the way that most creators fund their work through sponsorships. They give away some of the time in each of their videos to try and get you to buy tools or audiobooks or mattresses, and you buy those things, and then the companies that you buy them from give a little bit of that money back to the creators, and they keep the rest of it. And that really seems like a silly system to me. It seems like instead creators should just get paid directly for their work by the people who use it and enjoy it. And my channel doesn't do sponsorships, and that's why I'm on Patreon. So if you enjoy my content, and if I save you money or teach you a new technique, think about going over to patreon.com/RexKruger and throwing in a couple of dollars. Patreon is one of my biggest sources of income, and it absolutely makes videos like this possible. I've recently been doing exclusive videos for my patrons, like an exclusive shop tour, and pretty soon I'm doing an Ask Me Anything video. And coming up in September, I am giving away this Hong Kong-style jack plane. Not only is this an excellent tool, but I've also done all the work that it takes to get this thing ready to go. So if you're the one who wins, you're going to get a plane that's flattened, straightened, honed, sharpened, everything. It's going to be ready to go right out of the box. I'm going to post the winner on September the 15th, so anybody who becomes a patron by September 14th will be eligible to win this plane. And even if you don't feel like you're ready to support this work, if you can't afford to, that's completely fine. I love having viewers. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and thanks for watching.